Okay, should we? 45 minutes? Hi, everyone. We're going to have 45 minutes of watching me in a hoodie in this heat slowly melt. I can't take it off now. It'll be awkward. Awkward.
Now's your time.
We'll wait till I'm properly sweating. Hi, everyone. I know you're probably bored of people saying how brilliant it is to be back in rooms with people, but it is. And what better way to celebrate than by talking about people doing things in virtual rooms online again? I love FastForward. I'm so glad FastForward is back in studio to echo the other people here today saying this. I've always come here as a journalist to hear different people, to meet different people. It's a wonderful conference, so I'm glad it's back. My name's Stuart. I work for Music Ally. We do journalism, we do training, we do events, we do stuff around the music industry. We actually did an event back in 2006 about Second Life, the virtual world, at a time when people were getting excited about what you could do with music in Second Life. And we had a guy from an agency there who we kind of asked him, how much does it cost to build an island in Second Life for your artist? And he was like, well, you've got to do at least 100 grand, sometimes mid-hundreds, occasionally $1 million. And there was this sound in the room which was kind of part gasp, part laugh, and part everyone thinking, fuck that bullshit, and looking for the wine at the back. Like, we accidentally put the whole industry off Second Life, which we didn't mean to do. But since then, we've still been interested in games and virtual worlds and how music fits into them, what music fans are doing in them. And so I'm really excited today to have a panel of people who are excited about what can be done and who are doing it. None of us are Metaverse evangelists who'll be barking at you. Like, I think we're all music people, music lovers, and we want to talk about what this could mean for our artists and people who love music. So I'm going to spare them the having to introduce themselves. I'm going to do it. We've got Julia, head of music label partnerships at Meta, so the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, but possibly most relevant for this, the Quest headsets, Horizon Worlds, and a whole bunch of VR and Metaverse stuff. We've got Kara, who is VP of Digital Strategy and Business Development at Warner Music Group, and you work in the side looking at new stuff, don't you? I mean, there's probably a technical term for it, but you're looking at new models, new areas, new spaces. We've got Michael, who's Senior Director of Web3 and NFTs at Media Monks, which is kind of a team of digital creators and brand strategists thinking about all this stuff. And we've got Darren, owner and MD of strategic marketing firm Motive Unknown. So we've got a good mix of people doing different things here. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with setting the scene. There's no one metaverse, like in the books that invented the term. There's no one virtual world that we all use. There's some big games like Fortnite, there's some big gaming platforms like Roblox, which is loads of games. There's little virtual worlds, there's new things popping up all the time. So where do we start as music people in terms of figuring out what's interesting where we go? Are we just trying to kind of go for the biggest games and get the biggest reach? Are we trying to experiment with small things? How do we get started in exploring what's possible? I guess I'm going to come to you first, Kara, because you had some thoughts on this.
Because my eyes are wildly darting around the room.
You were looking like you had something good to say, is what I was going to say.
Yeah. I mean, we've chatted mutually beforehand, and I think we're all in agreement that the metaverse is purely a concept right now. We're not there yet. So anything that we might be talking about is potentially a decade away, and the worlds that we're talking about right now are going to be components of that future unified interoperable metaverse, right? So any players that we're talking about right now may exist in a decade, may not, may evolve rapidly. So it's really difficult for us to kind of pick any winners or to kind of future-proof for that. So we're investing, we're leaning in, we're excited, but we can't necessarily forecast everything right now.
It's kind of nice to have a tech panel where we're not sort of saying, you can forecast all this. Because one of the things we talked about was that a lot of people are now going, oh my God, I'm not really part of the gaming world or virtual worlds world. Is that a thing? The virtual worlds world. Am I too late? And I think what we all think maybe is that this is super early. I mean, Julia, you were talking about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that we see a lot. We get labels, partners who come to us with that air of, shit, we need to get on it because it's the next big thing, but we don't know where to start. Help us, quick. And I think what we're trying to say is, it's okay, because we don't know what we're doing. Like Kara said, we're all experimenting together. And now's your time to get on it and experiment. Experience the headsets, experience the world, but you gotta get on it now, and otherwise you're not going to have an opinion on what develops over the next couple of years. But it is really, really early on, and we're in it all together, right? I think that's the key message here, is also that there's no, like you said, there's no one metaverse, there's no one company building it. There's lots of different ways that we're all exploring, and God knows what's going to be winning out at the end. But we're 10 to 15 years away from a fully visualized metaverse. So don't panic, but start playing with it and start building together.
Okay, and I guess Mike and Darren, how do you think about this when you're thinking about what the music industry should be? What should be the first steps if we're working with artists looking to step into this world or do interesting things?
Yeah, so I think we see the more like established virtual worlds, the Fortnites, the Roblox, the Minecrafts. They get incredible numbers.
Yeah.
The more kind of newer upstarts, the likes of the Sandbox, Decentraland, Horizon Worlds, these are all, they're building their audience right now. So we don't have the tens of hundreds of millions in these worlds just yet. And that is a blessing and a curse. There is a sense of experimentation right now. For example, we have with Warner Music doing the Access Pass with the Sandbox as one point of reference for experimentation. Snoop Dogg has got quite heavily into it, making a playable character that you can play inside the Sandbox, which is a game. So we're seeing the sort of very small touches of, there's interest, there's enthusiasm, there's excitement for this. But I think we're all still moving more towards the sort of maturation of maybe like the likes of Roblox, which has tens of hundreds of millions. That's not quite there yet, I don't think, in this new space.
Yeah, and Darren, we've been on panels for years and years, haven't we? And we've been at conferences, and we're often at the back of the room going, it's rubbish. You're one of my people I trust to call out stuff that is rubbish. And so it's interesting to me that you're actually quite interested and optimistic in what games and virtual worlds can do. So that's not about a terrible intro, but...
Yeah, I think I've mellowed in middle age. I mean, you basically just highlighted I'm old. So, yeah, I mean, I think I've seen a lot of people expending a lot of energy kind of shitting on the whole thing constantly, and it's just a bit tiresome. And I'm just enjoying fooling around with it. I've got to say, I mean, we're in a period now, like when I first was, you and I probably crossed paths, it'd be like 2009, something like that. Who did the intake of breath?
I heard someone gasp that.
Jesus. And back then it was like a period of high innovation. So there was always this thing, and I remember writing an article for Music Ally about, we'd all become a bit lazy in marketing because we basically were just like, what's the current startup vying for our attention? Find that, do something with it, bang the drum for 24 hours, thank you very much. Marketing, tick. And we had that period, that passed. I think we've had a sort of fallow period, and then COVID forced more innovation. And I think what that's led to is now this re-acceleration of innovation, which brings the good and the bad. You do get an influx of stuff that's not very interesting, or, the usual stuff that just grates on all of us, some twat from Silicon Valley claiming he's fixed the music industry and you just didn't realise it yet, and things like that. But really it's turning into a period where there's a lot more interesting things. So I think for me and for my company, it's been a time to just fool around with this stuff. And, we even created a virtual office in Gather, which I forced everyone to use. Didn't end well, but I think nobody quite understood what we were doing in it. But it's fun to try it. And it is that thing, I think it's what when we were talking before, we were all agreeing. It was like, just go out and try stuff. Get the headsets, have a mess around with those. I bought the wireless mobile Meta Oculus One. Go. Yeah, the smaller one. And, just to fool around on it and understand it. So I think it's worth trying those things and seeing what is out there and, being open-minded, because it's a phase where all of this is still to come. And you're getting in now nice and early, understanding it all. I think we all agreed, and you were saying at the start, Julie, you haven't missed the boat. It's not some weird thing that you can't understand. It's all there, and it's getting more and more accessible. And to me, it's just interesting and different and exciting. I like it. Now I'm a parent to a 16-year-old son, watching him and what he does. And, I'm not sure if everyone else is status as parents. I know you do, but you know, it's the same watching your kids, what they're doing, learning from that, seeing what their behaviour around Fortnite, Minecraft, all these things is. It's great. It's interesting to see.
It feels like one of the differences here maybe is that often new technologies we're going, this new thing's brilliant, you should do it. There's only 2 people doing it at the moment, and you're pushing it on people. Whereas with some of this, I think Roblox has got, what, 50, 60 million daily users?
This is super mainstream already because we're talking about existing behavior. Like, so much of what the metaverse will just be gamified experiences and office experiences. And guess what? We all play games, and our kids do, and we all go to offices, and we all sit in virtual workspaces and work together. This is normal behavior. We plug into this every day. So the question is just, how will that be augmented and improved over the next decade? How will all of these workspaces and gaming spaces work together over the next decade? And how will artists and music be able to be plugged into those experiences over the next decade?
I don't know about the rest of you, but I think it's also really funny that we have an amazing ability to miss or ignore things that are massive.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I remember working with a band and their music got used in the League of Legends final. Nobody on the team had heard of it. We were completely ambivalent about it until someone told us that 80 million people use it worldwide and more people watch the final than watch the Super Bowl. Yeah. And we were all just like, oh, okay, so this is a huge thing and we've just been completely oblivious. So you can miss these things. And I think Roblox is a good example. It feels like it's a very binary thing where people either get it and into it or they've never heard of it.
Yeah.
I was told you were coming in to talk about your successful strategy working League of Legends. Is that not true?
Every time, yeah. I still couldn't tell you what it looks like, to be completely honest. It's embarrassing.
I mean, I want to get into what you can do in these virtual worlds and games. Because, I mean, I remember the thing that clicked for me was seeing the Travis Scott thing in Fortnite. And my kids spent a whole week getting excited about it. That was interesting. And when I saw it, it wasn't just his avatar on a stage playing a concert. He was about, 40 foot tall, stomping around the game landscape. My kids were screaming every time something happened in it. It was like a real, and I was like, wow, this is something there is interesting here. It's not just trying to recapture a gig. So that was my moment of thinking there's something real here. But what have you all seen? What have you done? What's an exciting, meaningful metaverse music experience? Not there's only one. What are the many?
Yeah, so when it comes to meaningful, the kind of light bulb moment for me was the Logitech Songbreaker Music Awards, which was recently in Roblox. And that was the first ever music awards ceremony inside the metaverse. And why I think that was really interesting is because, so 1, it was accessibility for everyone. 2 was a global audience. And 3, it was artists reaching new fans and new audiences. And one of the things that I don't think gets talked about enough is accessibility with the metaverse and how one disability vlogger called All Access Life, who has about 20,000 subscribers, he used an eye tracking device to control his character only inside Roblox. He had an amazing time. He didn't have to think about all of the things that you think about as an able-bodied person going to a gig. So he didn't have to think about how to get there, if there was an accessible toilet, if there was enough room to maneuver his wheelchair. It was an incredibly liberating experience for not able-bodied people. And I think that is one of the things that opens up the metaverse to a much broader and much more accessible, is really the only way to call it. So for me, that was one of the most meaningful experiences that I can think of that really touched me in a way that nothing else did.
I agree, and the money aspect as well, right? Like there are so many people who can't afford to travel to London to see a show, or they can't afford the ticket, or they can't afford the merch, afterwards, because it's very expensive to buy a T-shirt nowadays. So the thought of democratizing access to different kinds of experiences, whether you choose to go see it in real life, whether you choose to go, see it from your couch because you're too lazy to travel, you can't afford to travel, you don't have access to the means to the venue. I think that democratization is extremely exciting because suddenly your audiences, everyone can be your audience. There's not really that barrier to entry anymore, or less of it.
I mean, no, I was just going to say, I think it's a fascinating thing I'm seeing with the youth, the younger kids. Is like one of my colleagues was saying that his kids, he lives down in Dorset, and his kids couldn't be bothered to schlep to wherever the nearest gig was, but there was a live stream, so they basically just turned it into a party in the house and got the beers in with all their mates and just had it on there, and that was it. And again, it's that thing of there's so much. None of this is going to replace live. It can be an addendum to it, and you can be selling tickets to people, who you were never going to tour to
like
anyway.
Me, I don't travel to West London. Sorry, I'm in Southeast London. If a gig is in West London, I moan. I can't. I can't. So
I live in West London. This explains why we've never crossed paths.
Sorry.
But I think a really key component of this is that live streaming, it does exist. Ticketed gigs exist. I wouldn't say we sold that during the pandemic, but we certainly normalized remote attendance to shows. So like from my perspective, the metaverse, forthcoming, has so much more potential than just these ticketed live shows. Because Travis Scott, mind-blowing. These shows that are happening now that are like tentpole, premium artist, premium 3D visual shows, stunning. But they're expensive to put on, and they're not replicable, and they're not sustainable. So what do fans do between those events? Because they take 6 months, a year to set up. What do you do every day as a fan? How is your fandom interactive with other fans? Well, you buy merch, and you have tattoos, and you write fanfic, and you do fan art, and all of these things that the Web3 will help power that you kind of already do now. It's instinctual as fandom. That's what will be much more powerful in Metaverse. Not just doing shows. Sorry.
I think maybe on the flip side of that as well, Travis Scott did make $18 million in 3 days.
Yeah, but how expensive was it to put on?
Maybe so, but he brought in around $53 million for a 4-month touring festival and $80 million for 3 days. So from a commercial aspect, and you can maybe point more to that, from a commercial, that seems for the 3 days versus 4 months, I know which one, if I was an artist, which one I would rather want to do.
Yeah, I can think, it's a good point about the price, and I've got no inside knowledge, but I'm assuming that Epic Games, Fortnite's project, probably fit a lot of that bill.
Got to come from somewhere.
So this brings on exactly what you're saying, two things I was thinking about. One is this about more than just the biggest artists? So what are these experiences like for emerging artists, smaller artists? And two, like you say, are they going to be persistent experiences rather than just one concert? I don't know if anyone's ever been to any of the Roblox performances that artists have done. You can still visit those places months later and no one's there, and there's like an empty merch store, there's a stage, and you realize everything is being built for one-off things. But so I guess in the future, are we moving towards a place where there'll be a wider range of artists in terms of sizes, and will there be more stuff going on all the time rather than just one thing and then forget it?
Yeah, I think it'll be both. I think you'll always have those big artists who have support from major labels, from platforms who can have those big moments. But I think what fans crave and want is that community aspect around it. So the ability to connect with each other throughout, not just on the day of the experience and I've got someone sitting next to me and hi, bye. But like what happens when you're not at the virtual show? Like how can I connect with fans, similar to what fans still do on forums, on other platforms, Facebook groups, whatever it might be. So that connection, and then also the ability to shape together, right? So it's also about being creative together, about maybe you influence the songwriting process, maybe you influence the set lists of the live shows, but being part of that creative world and not just about, I'm dialing in for that show and I'm off again. It's about everything around it and that community that you build, and then all the possibilities that come from within that community, whether this is merch, whether this is being creative together, meeting other creators, creating your own world, whatever it might be, but it's really about everything else around it. I think that's where we're going to go and where the opportunities lie. Yeah.
And was it you, Cara, in the prep, who was talking about Metaverse being about community, not audience? Because that's something that came through earlier on as well, I think, one of the talks. This idea of like, we're maybe shifting as an industry from thinking about audiences to communities of people who want to create, not just kind of watch and listen.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the fundamental tenets of Metaverse and Web3 is that we're talking about community and interactive communities, like really collaborative, rather than just audiences that we can try and shepherd and direct to a particular experience one time and monetize once. So yeah, we're putting resource into community managers. We're putting resource into helping communities manage themselves, into persistent experiences where communities go and do their own thing and build their own worlds and build their own games. So that we, again, don't just have like one-off Travis Scott show. We've got worlds that fans build for each other, for our artists.
It's kind of weird for. Okay.
I was going to say, I definitely think, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the best initial examples of this metaverse thing will be fan built. Because I think there's so much red tape, you know, and it's like trying to get anything away with an artist or manager, whereas the fans just go, no, fuck it, we're just going to bowl in and show you how it should be done. And then I suspect and sort of slightly fear that that's what it's going to be. Because the ideal world where I sit is like, it's artist-led, but I suspect the reality is it will be fan-led because I just think fans move quicker. And they've got no red tape. So.
Yeah, they do. Like we're actively building persistent worlds in Sandbox at the moment, but we're definitely going to build elsewhere. We're intentionally leaving room and virtual real estate around us, around our Warner lands, so that fans can do exactly this. Like you're a big Snoop fan, you're going to go buy land next to the doggies' land. Absolutely. And we've just launched a Swaco experience. And we've got tons more experiences that we're going to launch in Sandbox, persistent, long-term. And we're expecting those fans are going to crop up next to us and chime in.
Is it a good moment for that? I mean, we promised Chris we wouldn't talk about licensing, so I won't talk too much about licensing. But when I started writing about music, this whole idea of user-generated content, it was like, kill it now. It's not ours. Someone's put a video up with our music in, get rid of it. And now I feel like now everyone's going, oh, wow, actually there's loads of money to be made on Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok if we license it. Is that going to be a good thing for these kind of things in the metaverse where, because we're going to have to say to fans, here are some assets you can build with, here is the music, and we're not going to sue you or take it down for building something. Is it a good moment for that kind of thinking, I suppose, because the industry is more relaxed about fans building stuff?
Yeah, no, I think there's one really interesting area that we haven't touched upon too much is the whole fractionalization of music as well in Web3. And I think that is super interesting to be able to have some sense of ownership of a track by your favorite artist. That is going to become, I think, more and more commonplace where we're going to see artists come up out of nowhere and be able to create albums and sell out albums like Spotty Wi-Fi, who is one of the first who sold an album on OpenSea and it sold out within minutes. So for me, I think there's a lot of more esteemed music on the right side and licensing, but I feel like having to have a little skin in the game, a little bit of sense of ownership is one of the biggest changes for Web3 coming from Web2 is that sort of, real participation.
I think with a lot of it, you're trying to, so at Motive Unknown, we've tried to find artists that we can work with on this, but there's just so much around them that encumbers it. That we're now, like the artist we're talking to that I can't name is because he's got no manager, no deal, no publishing, but it therefore means he's like ultra agile and we can then start seeing what's out there and what we can do with them. But it's a sort of constant annoyance of mine that I think, there is so much red tape around these things and it can wind up screwing it up. But even, it's not a metaverse thing, is it? Even now with artists, like we're trying to create, fan merch stores so the fans can create designs, it will be part of the official store. The fans make money, the band makes money, everybody wins. But I feel like that's kind of a good analogy for all of these things. If we all muck in and you actually engage with this stuff and, find the most talented of your fans and what they've got to offer, you can do so much more. Whereas at the moment, I think there's still too much of a sort of, among a certain side of the music industry, there's a bit of a them and us thing. And, as you said, there'll be artists coming through that couldn't care less about that and are just fully in for anything, all of it, and away they go.
I'm just glad I don't work in licensing.
It's not
that bad, actually. There are services, I don't specifically work in licensing, but there are services that specifically license for games. There are micro-licensing services for Web3 opportunities. Like, we're actively licensing all of these new worlds because we know that music has to be ubiquitous in them. That's part of not picking the winners in advance. Like, we've actively got to give everyone the music and then see, how the economy will regulate itself.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, did anyone have a big Animal Crossing phase during the pandemic? Anyone else? Do you remember when everyone started creating album cover T-shirts and artwork for walls? There's a whole economy now, I'm crossing of you could create Nirvana's Nevermind as a thing to go on, and you could only share it for free. You couldn't sell it. And I remember thinking at the time, thank God, because if they could sell it, this would be lawsuits flying everywhere. But people had creative tools, and they wanted to. I had a question down here actually. Should we just jump in with a question? Is there a mic? Sorry, jumping in earlier on you.
Check. Cool. I'm going to describe an experience and hopefully I land with a question as I get to the end of it. So I started working with Prince's Trust during lockdown, and they were doing their entrepreneurial program for business startups in the UK. And they was hesitant to help me take my business further because I wanted to include things like NFTs and cryptocurrency because of the fact that it's not regulated properly in the UK as well as it is overseas. So for a UK artist who is wanting to engage with the new tech space as things are, there are barriers where being based here means that we can't engage in the same way that the examples you're giving us of American artists are able to do so. Companies like Meta, for example, I guess are large enough to, not so much large enough, but being companies at that level, what kind of conversations are you having with local government on a UK level to where we can engage with these new technologies and not end up in jail like Ghana, for example?
Which makes sense. Like we mentioned Snoop Dogg earlier on. Snoop Dogg is always early to all this stuff. He's been doing all this. Is that because he's in America and he's got a freer hand? Is a UK artist kind of maybe held back from doing some of these things?
I mean, I was going to say anything's possible if you try hard enough, in the sense of if an artist wanted to explore that space, I'm sure they could do that. You know, to the question around funding and the Prince's Trust not seeing it in perhaps the best way.
Well, mainly that's because of the tax purposes, of course. So if you're,
and there are things around this that it is difficult. I appreciate it's difficult, but yeah, I think generally if people want to lean into it, they will. I don't think that there's, I mean, unless someone counters me like a regulatory difference in the US that makes it easier. I think it's just easier because he's Snoop Dogg and he's got millions, and so it's a lot easier to have a man that can, or woman who can, organise that stuff for them. So there's a bit of that as well.
Yeah. And we should talk about money, actually, and this leads on to, I think, some of your question about how you make money in the metaverse. Because some of that stuff is NFTs, these things, but other things are virtual merchandise. And what are the things that are interesting and what are the things that are achievable, to bring back to your question, that aren't kind of fraught with regulation problems? What have you seen that's, I know it's not exciting, maybe money making, but what are the things you've seen that are encouraging in terms of how artists can make this pay for them, I suppose?
So I just did one more point on what you were thinking beforehand. Chart accreditation, just starting. So and music NFTs will be chart accredited soon. And we're chatting with IPI like now-ish. We're super early days with all of this stuff. The regulation is coming. So just that point there.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, in terms of other opportunities, I mean, there's so much. There's virtual real estate and and avatar skins and, I mean, in-game consumables and unlockable levels and, I mean, you name it. There's so much here.
And then there's a no-brainer with virtual combined with physical merch. So I see, for example, Adam Bomb Squad hoodie right there in the audience. That is an NFT project. Adidas with their Into the Metaverse campaign. I love the hoodie that I got from Adidas for owning one of the NFTs. So it's a kind of new form of value exchange through these communities, through sort of earning access to new and traditional means. Merch is nothing new, but being able to only have access to that because you own that particular NFT or you're a member of that program, that gives you a sense of exclusivity, and it gives you sort of like this sort of sense of cachet. So I think there is this newness coming through with brands as well with the access pass that you can buy in the sandbox to get you exclusive benefits. That for me is the next frontier of community for brands in the music space and beyond, where it's becoming sort of like a tiered Amazon Prime of benefits. Whoever you are, whatever brand and an artist, that for me is where I think it's going to go. But then there's obviously going to become virtual festivals. You know, I don't know if many people are familiar with Dollywood, which is Dolly Parton's theme park in the US.
Who's been to Dollywood? Anyone been there? Oh, they go, right.
Of course you did, Lara.
So let me say that TripAdvisor voted Dollywood the #1 theme park in the US, and it's just recently getting a $500 million expansion. This is not small play here. This is Dolly Parton creating an immersive experience. So we need more virtual Dollywoods, in my opinion.
I think that, do you remember years ago, this is again showing my age possibly as Stuart, but there was that guy Mike Masnick did that presentation and he had this sort of little pithy thing at the top that said if you connect with fans and give them a reason to buy, you know, it'll equal money, you know, dollar signs. And I think it's the same principle here. You know, you see a lot of, you know, stuff that doesn't give them a reason to buy, or the proposition isn't good enough in the same way as in the real world. If you offered somebody a cheap, badly printed T-shirt for 50 quid, they're probably not going to buy it. But I think in the metaverse, it's just the same thing. You know, if you connect, whether it's they're paying for access to stuff, whether they're paying for, you know, rights to have something, whether they're, you know, virtual merch, all of the things that have been named, as long as the reason to buy them is good and the fans feel invested, then everybody's happy. It's when it becomes egregious, you know, when you're fleecing people that people rightly complain, just like they do in the real world. But there's no real difference, you know, and I think it's just ensuring the value proposition is sound is what counts.
I sometimes, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to add, I do want to, Cara, you said it, but I do want to mention avatars again, because I think that's super exciting. Because avatars are nothing other than, you know, a way to express yourself. You know, we're all going to have an avatar. We might have 3, 4 avatars, depending on how we feel, you know, in the morning, what avatar we want to pick, you know, that represents us on that specific day, the mood that we're in. And you also, as a fan, want to have the ability to then showcase your fandom in your avatar, right? So, or what your style, what you're wearing, you know. I think the avatar store and being able to personalize and express yourself through an avatar is going to be incredibly, incredibly important. So we have partnerships with, in our avatar store, we've got partnerships with Prada, with Balenciaga, with Tom Brown, so you can already dress yourself in fancy suits. We've just launched a partnership with DressX, you know, where, again, it's all about being able to move that self-expression that we do every single morning when we decide what clothes we put on into the, you know, into the metaverse, and giving everyone, artists and fans, to the chance to express themselves in that way.
I wonder if there's sometimes a culture gap or a generation gap, perhaps, of understanding there's value in virtual items. Because I know some people, if you maybe haven't grown up gaming virtual worlds, or you're not part of that, it seems a bit silly to pay money for a virtual skin. And like when my kids ask for Christmas, all they want is money so they can spend it on Robux or Fortnite. My parents find that difficult because they're like, well, they're not getting anything, are they? But to my kids, it's very valuable. So is that something that maybe the music industry gets its head around, that actually virtual items, characters, skins, things to build with, there's real value there for fans? We're not just trying to sell them something useless, I suppose.
Yeah, I feel like through all the pain that we've been through in the music industry for the past 15, 20 years, the one thing that we have got our head around is a sense of ownership and lack of tangibility. Like, what is a stream? You don't own that stream, but you get to experience it and be a fan and enjoy it every day. So what is an Unknown Pleasures t-shirt in the metaverse? You own it, but you don't, and it's on you, but it's not. There's a sense of value there, and it augments your personal identity. So it feels quite natural, potentially. Just, you know, you've got to massage yourself into that space.
Isn't it that grand irony, though, that most people in the music business are sort of probably not tapped into what young kids are doing very well. And so I think parents, it's a godsend Because I've definitely had so many instances of looking at what my son's doing, just thinking that looks like utter shit. But he is absolutely invested into it. I mean, you know, again, sounding like we're two old farts now, but I remember you and me talking about like...
What do you mean we?
Yeah, well, I know,
You're the
right?
one talking.
Talking about like Stampy Longnose and all the sort of YouTubers at the time, and sitting watching perplexed as our kids were sort of loving watching these guys building stuff in Minecraft, and we're watching it going, just build it yourself in Minecraft. That's the point of the game. But they want to do that, and it carries value and cultural value. And being into that to them is no different to saying you're into the Arctic Monkeys or anything else. And it's these things where you know, it should be like a rite of passage in the music business that they just go and dispatch you to go and live in fucking Sheffield with a family who've got an Xbox and see what the kids do and just walk a mile outside of the London media bubble.
Get outside our bubble.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's interesting because I suppose we're going to get to the point soon where people were coming into the industry who have grown up building in Roblox, playing Fortnite, which brings its own questions of accessibility if you haven't had access to those consoles, those games, and that's another angle of that, of is the metaverse going to be built by people who had access to the technology, which is important. I mean, we're going to have have we got 10 minutes or 5, Chris? 10, okay. So I've got one more question and then we'll come out for questions. We're going to look to the future, and one thing I wanted to ask about was, we were saying we can't pick winners. It's hard to say these days, this will be the big virtual world, be in it. But we can't do everything. So how does this go in the future? Like, are we going to end up with these virtual worlds and games being interoperable, being able to take your thing you had in one game into another? Or are some clear winners going to emerge we can pick? Or how do we kind of make sure what we're doing now doesn't then end up as dust because that virtual world game goes down? Like, how do we future-proof what we're doing? Or do we not need to worry about that yet? Do we just need to kind of experiment and play?
I think no one on this stage is going to tell you who the winner is, unless they've got a crystal ball and they can see into the future. But two things that I think are really interesting, future gazing. One is spatial music, which is a much more immersive sense of experience. And research has proven that spatial music has a higher click-through rate and engagement rate for brands and artists as well. So that's one. And then second is, we've touched on it a little bit, but the interoperability going into the future. For example, a company called Ready Player Me, they've just raised $50 million to create interoperable metaverse avatars. And that is where it's going to go, where you have one identity that can be across all the virtual worlds that are created, rather than having to create one for every single one and then not speaking to each other. That, there for me, is mind-blowingly huge.
Yeah, I agree. I think the interoperability is incredibly important because you want to be able to, as a fan, I want to be able to showcase who I'm a fan of in all the different worlds, right? I don't want to have to invest in one area and then, you know, get my badge of honor in one area and can't transport it into the other area. So I think that's something that's super exciting. I think that's something that a lot of companies are heavily invested in. Meta, for example, is one of the co-founding members of the Metaverse Standards Forum, which is looking into how much does the current lack of interoperability actually hold us back, and what can we do against that, right? To make sure that this is a bit more of a, like, let's all work towards something together. And like you said, the spatial audio, because that gives you the sense of presence, right? Like the metaverse is all about that sense of presence. That's, not you looking at a screen. You're meant to be in it. You're meant to feel it. Your hairs are meant to, stand up when you, like, someone whispers in your ear. It's really that, like, experience around you. And for that, you need the spatial audio to be much better than it currently is.
It's kind of cool to think about what people are doing in live. Like when I go to see the Chemical Brothers now, it really is a kind of experience all around you. I know Super for Animals did a spatial audio thing. Like, bands have been thinking about how to make it surround you, the visuals and audio and that kind of thing. I mean, we've got about 5 minutes maybe, so we should go for questions. I saw one here. Go ahead.
Hello. I have to say, a panel has never given me more anxiety in my life. So I've been doing this, like, I'm so anxious now because I have a 2-year-old. So I'm thinking, what is she going to be doing in 10 years? Is she going to be in her room all day, not wanting to talk to me? Well, obviously, she's going to be a teenager, probably. But it gives me anxiety about the future. But that's not the question. The question is, how do educate ourselves in all of this? Because my two main streams of information for the last 5 years have been Darren's emails and Stu's emails from their jobs. And it's like, I read it, but sometimes I don't understand it. Not because they don't know how to write, they write beautifully. But for example, NFTs, I keep reading about it, and it's like, I still don't get it. Not just for my job, but as a parent, if that's the future, how can we educate ourselves about it?
I mean, you at some point you just have to start somewhere, right? A journey sort of begins with the first step, to sound a bit Buddhist. But, you know, it's that thing of just at some stage, you know, I had the same thing of sitting there going, I don't fucking understand any of this. And it's really irritating me. And then you just have to sort of, you know, find someone who knows more than you, probably be younger than you as well, which it certainly was
That
for
will
me.
be your daughter, actually. She'll be the ideal person to lead you through some of this, probably, because she'll understand it and
Yeah,
she'll want to tell you.
And, I mean, you know, I'm sure it wasn't, you know, you weren't asking in the context of that. But as for children, my son is 16. I watched him being very insular and very digital for a period, and it worried me. I mean, not to be crass, he's discovered going out and, you know, there are things that you can't do so well digitally that the metaverse might struggle with. So now he's off and doing that. And so finally he sort of realised there's more interesting things out in the great beyond. So it's fine, you know, I don't think we should fear this stuff. And, you know, and I don't think it's something to demonise, because I think we do it with kids alone, right? We'll sit there and go, oh, fucking kids in hoodies, they're probably up to no good. You know, and we've got to knock that on the head, it's silly. But I think with all of it, it just, you just have to start somewhere. And in my case, like, you know, there's been a sort of joke among my colleagues at work. We can't find artists to work out what releasing music in the Web3 space looks like. So now I'm taking songs that I've made and I'm releasing those, because it just allows us the easiest way to find out what that's like.
Very good one.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I turned my chickens into NFTs to learn how to make an NFT. Yeah. Like, in fact, Musical as a company had a thing for a month where we gave each staff member a certain amount of money and said, go and buy some NFTs, make some, and then come back and tell us what you learned.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And we didn't even think it was brilliant at the end, actually. A lot of us were like, well, that's like, but we just tried it. We kind of played a bit, I suppose.
Yeah, it's you know, I didn't know what the metaverse was or what it looked like until, you know, very recently compared to my career. But then I forced my team to have team meetings in Horizon workrooms. You know, I was like, I don't know how this is going to go, but we need to be experiencing it, because otherwise I'm sitting in front of you and I'm talking to you about something that I've never experienced. I've attempted building a world. It went really crap. No one, it's definitely not something to be proud of, but you just got to start doing it.
I mean,
I think a key point in this as well is that metaverse is not synonymous with VR. We're not necessarily talking about kids locking themselves behind a headset 24/7 and you'll never see them leave the room. Metaverse also is like multi-layer AR. So they'll be walking around, having a conversation with you whilst their favorite artist is, you know, a non-playable character next to them, or whatever it is. It's multiple layers of AR and MR and VR.
Yeah. So quickly, just firstly on the education piece of NFTs, you should speak to the guy that sat next to you. He knows a few things about NFTs, but also just find your sort of learning track. You know, whether it's podcasts or watching videos on YouTube from people that are doing it, or just getting stuck in yourself. I've learned from bitter and painful experience of getting into NFTs and buying the wrong ones, but then learning, you know, some of the market dynamics based on putting a little bit of skin in the game and a little bit of investment into it, both in time and, you know, personal funds, just to be able to know what is working and what isn't working just on a personal level. And that, for me, that sense of curiosity will stand you really well.
Cool.
Yeah, like do your own research. The only way you're ever going to understand what a gas fee is until you've been forced to pay one. So set aside 50 quid, each of you, go set up a wallet, learn how to do this yourself, buy something on OpenSea.
if it needs an article to walk you through it, I'll write the article. I don't mind.
I was going to say, don't mention the word gas fees to provoke more anxiety in the room.
Sorry, guys.
One last question here, yes.
Well, quickly, first of all, Darren, please write that article. I'm a bit opposite. The Never as a panel excited me more. I think the opportunities are amazing. But what I was wondering was, with all developments, all technological developments in music so far, there's been an opportunity to be quite passive. So, for example, with streaming, a lot of the revenue generation recently has been through the sort of passive listening rather than the hardcore fans. With the metaverse, do you think there'll be that opportunity? Because from what I can see and from what I've learned, the little I've managed to learn so far, is you have to be fully on board. Like you were saying, you have to get involved, you have to go out and actually do it. Do you think as it develops, there'll be an opportunity for parents, for people who aren't interested in being an active part of the communities, to be passive members?
Yeah, 100%. That's that difference between just attending a show in the metaverse versus being a really active community admin running around creating narratives and building for your artists. You can just buy a ticket to a show and watch an artist on stage. And as a parent, you may do that. It's fine.
Okay. Well, fab. Well, I think we've had a good thing there, because I think the anxiety is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think a lot of people feel that, and the excitement too. And I don't think we could have solved either of those things today, but I think what's come across is this idea of you can play with this stuff, and actually you don't need to be a metaverse expert at the start. You can just experience it. So thank you very much to the panel. And can I ask you to give a round of applause for our marvellous guests?